Michael didn't notice the silence at first, because in his mind, there was never silence, only the steady hum of thoughts, voices, memories that weren't entirely his. The other kids were bent over their notebooks. The teacher was scribbling equations on the board, and he was just talking. Not loud, not attention-seeking, just under his breath, lips moving with words no one else could hear. Until the moment the room froze. A girl at the front of the class stopped mid-sentence, her pencil falling and rolling in the dead air, because what Michael whispered wasn't English, wasn't anything they'd ever learned. But somehow, every single person in that room felt the weight of it pressing into their chest. You're not supposed to know this, you tell yourself as you listen, but here you are already deeper than you should be, replaying the strange pause in that classroom where time seemed to buckle, where the teacher's chalk snapped against the board without reason. Nobody spoke of it again, not in the halls, not at lunch. And yet, someone must have reported it, because weeks later, a pair of men in suits walked into that same school. They didn't introduce themselves to the principal. They didn't check in at the office. They walked straight into Michael's classroom and asked him to step outside. The air shifted, every eye watching, every breath caught in throats, because their badges were flashed just long enough for the teacher to see the letters she dared not repeat. You think it's a story, you think it's rumor. But ask yourself, when has the FBI ever come for a high school boy who hadn't done anything at all? That's the detail nobody talks about. That's the file you weren't meant to open. They didn't question him in the office, not in the parking lot, not even inside the building. They led him across the street, to a waiting black car that had been idling for hours. Someone swears his lips were still moving as the door closed, whispering the same strange rhythm, the same impossible words. Michael never came back to class after that. No transfer papers, no explanation, no record of his name in the school database a month later, as if he'd been erased. The desks were rearranged, the seating chart updated, and when someone asked about him, the teacher blinked too long before saying she didn't know who they were talking about. But here's where the story bends, where your stomach turns. 2 nights ago, long after midnight, a girl from that same class claims her phone lit up. No number, no caller ID, just static on the line end. Then his voice, clear, whispering the same impossible phrase, in the same unplaceable tongue. And the last thing she heard before the line died wasn't words at all. It was the sound of someone else breathing on the other end. Someone who shouldn't exist. Would you like me to continue this story beyond the opening? Deepening the paranoia with missing memories and hidden recordings? Or should I keep it as just the immersive hook for the video intro? The call should have ended there, a late-night glitch, a pocket dial, a dream mistaken for reality. But the girl swore it wasn't a dream. She swore she knew his voice, Michael's steady and unbroken whispering that strange, impossible phrase, each syllable carrying weight like stone dragged across concrete. She told her mother, but the words dissolved into an argument about stress, too much caffeine, too many hours scrolling in the dark. Yet the phone log was real. The call lasted exactly 47 seconds. No number, no trace. And when she tried to play the recording back, all she heard was her own voice, faint, as if she had been the one speaking to herself in a language she didn't know. That was the first fracture, the first doubt. By the time she told her closest friend, a boy named Aaron, it was already spreading. The feeling that something had been slipped into her life without permission, that she had stumbled onto a truth no one was supposed to repeat. Aaron didn't laugh it off. He didn't question her the way others did. He only leaned closer, lowering his voice like someone who already knew part of the story. And that made it worse, because if he wasn't surprised, then it meant Michael wasn't the only one. Aaron told her he remembered the moment in class, too. How the air felt like it bent, how the sound of Michael's whisper wasn't sound at all but pressure in the back of the skull. But when she asked him to repeat the words, to say them the way Michael had, his eyes changed. He froze, pupils widening just enough to give away a flash of something. Then he shook his head and said he couldn't, that he'd forgotten. Yet later that night, she found a message on her phone. An audio file forwarded from an unknown email, labeled "Only Listen Once." The voice on the file was Aaron's, and he was whispering the same phrase. When she confronted him, he denied everything. He swore he'd never sent it, never recorded it, never even heard of the file. His phone showed no history, no email, no trace, but she had it saved. She played it for him, and he looked sick, pale, shaking as though something inside him recoiled from hearing his own voice. He begged her to delete it. He begged her not to play it again. That was when she realized Aaron wasn't afraid of her. He was afraid of being heard. You'd think this is just rumor, another late-night teenage obsession, the kind of thing that dissolves under daylight. But ask yourself, why do the logs vanish? Why do the recordings change? Why, when you press play, do you sometimes hear your own voice saying words you swear you've never spoken? That's not imagination. That's not stress. That's something no one can explain away. And then came the second fracture. The girl woke up one morning and found her notebook covered in handwriting. She didn't remember writing. Not doodles, not scribbles, but sentences, neat and deliberate. written across the margins and down the center of the page. Every line was the same. You were there when he vanished. The problem is, she wasn't, or at least, she doesn't remember being there. She remembers Michael leaving with the men in suits. She remembers the black car. She remembers never seeing him again. But when she stared at those words over and over, something inside her cracked, and she wasn't sure anymore. She could picture herself outside, by the parking lot. She could picture his lips moving one last time. She could picture herself answering him. It's too easy to dismiss this as trauma, the brain filling in blanks with illusions. But then why, when she showed Aaron the notebook, did he tell her he had the same sentence scrawled across his own? Different paper, different pen, same words. Asterisk, you were there when he vanished. He swore he never wrote them. She swore she never wrote hers. This is where the story tilts into something heavier, something that tastes like metal at the back of the tongue. Because once you start doubting your own handwriting, you start doubting your own memories. And when you doubt your memories, nothing holds. You know if the people around you are lying, or if you're re-lying to yourself. You don't know if what you see is present tense or playback. The recordings kept spreading. Not publicly, not virally, but in little glitches. A voicemail from an unknown number where the only sound is your own voice. A clip embedded in a school projector file where Michael's whisper bleeds through the speakers for exactly 3 seconds before cutting off. A teacher swore she heard him in the middle of roll call, his name slipping out of her mouth as though it was still on the list. But when she checked her attendance sheet, there was nothing. His name wasn't there. That's the part no one wants to admit, the erasure. The quiet redacting of a person. And maybe you think that's conspiracy talk. Too many late nights, the mind chasing shadows. But then tell me why the yearbook came out without Michael's picture, why the school site crashed every time someone searched his name, why even the FBI visit itself was suddenly denied by the very staff who had watched it unfold. Aaron started unraveling next. He told the girl he was hearing the whispers even when no one else was speaking. Not English, not anything human, just the cadence of it, like static forming words that pressed into his skull. He said sometimes it wasn't Michael's voice at all, but his own, whispering to him from the corner of the room. He said sometimes it told him things, small things, things that later came true. The weather, a test question. The exact words a teacher would say before they said it. Was it prophecy? Was it madness? Or was it just that unbearable slip between memory and present, where you can't tell if you're living a moment or recalling it? That's what terrifies you, isn't it, that you've felt that too? Once or twice, in the quiet hours, when you knew what someone was about to say before they said it, and you told yourself it was nothing, just chance, just coincidence. But what if it wasn't? What if that's the truth behind what no one tells you? What if we all hear fragments of something else, some other timeline where the words are already spoken, some unfinished sentence bleeding into now? The girl wanted to believe Aaron. She wanted to believe her own fear was real. But then, the third fracture came. A recording surfaced of that day Michael in the classroom, lips moving. A video from a phone hidden under a desk. The sound wasn't clear, but you could see him whispering. You could see the teacher freeze. You could see the chalk snap. But here's the impossible part. When she showed the video to Aaron, the boy in the frame wasn't Michael, it was her. Her lips moving, her whispering, her classmates staring at her. The teacher's eyes on her, wide with the same fear she remembered seeing pointed at Michael. And when she screamed at Aaron that this was fake, edited, planted, he just shook his head. Because when he played the same video back on his phone, it wasn't her. It wasn't Michael either. It was him. This is where you stop asking questions. This is where you feel that weight in your chest, like you've already gone too far. Because, if they can change recordings, if they can alter handwriting, if they can swap faces and memory, what's left that you can trust? Some people call it paranoia. Some call it psychosis. Some call it interference from something that isn't supposed to exist. But the truth is, it doesn't matter what you call it. What matters is that it spreads. The whispers, the recordings, the impossible traces of people who never were, or maybe still are. And the cliffhanger you can't escape is this. 2 nights ago, Aaron vanished. No goodbye, no warning. Just gone. His bed empty, his phone dead, his house locked from the inside. And when the girl went to the school the next morning, his desk wasn't there anymore. The seating chart had been updated. The teacher blinked too long when his name was mentioned. And for the second time in less than a year, a boy was erased. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what she found waiting on her phone. A single voicemail, time-stamped at 3:17 a.m. No number, no caller ID, just silence. Then, after a pause, her own voice whispering into the dark. You were there when he vanished. Would you like me to keep unraveling this story into a third act, where the girl begins to question if she herself is the trigger of the erasures, or should I let it hang right here at the cliff, leaving the audience haunted with the unanswered question? For weeks, she told herself there had to be a logic, some rational thread she could follow to stitch the pieces back together. The missing students, the erasures, the recordings that shifted when you looked too closely. She buried herself in research, scrolling through half-forgotten forums about memory glitches and real unsolved mysteries, digging through articles that never seemed to stay published for more than a day before the links broke. She thought she was close, so close to uncovering the hidden truth no one else wanted to remember, and then she found it. A file buried in the school's archive system, mislabeled, half-corrupted, its date stamped nearly 30 years before Michael's disappearance. It wasn't video, it wasn't even clear audio. It was a transcript of a teacher's report, written in shaky cursive on a scan of yellowed paper. The words bled into each other, but one line stood out with unbearable clarity. Asterisk, he started whispering in class. The others froze. We were told not to write this down, but I had to. I had to leave proof. Asterisk, that was the first false resolution. She clung to it like oxygen. It wasn't just her, it wasn't just Michael, it wasn't even Aaron. This had happened before. Long before. Different names, different children, but the same impossible pattern. Whispers no one should understand. Time bending in the middle of ordinary lessons. A boy or girl removed by people who never returned them. She thought maybe this was it. The missing puzzle piece, the memory glitch solved, the hidden truth dragged into the open. She thought maybe she could finally explain to herself that she wasn't crazy, that the words weren't hers, that she wasn't unraveling. But the transcript contained one more line, scrawled in the margin almost like an afterthought. Asterisk, they told us it was her, not him. But the tape shows his face, not hers. The handwriting faltered at the end, as if the pen slipped from a trembling hand, and suddenly the air around her shifted, because she'd heard this before, hadn't she? The recording that switched faces. The footage that made her see herself whispering instead of Michael. The sense that memory itself was a weapon used against her, folded and refolded until nothing aligned anymore. For one terrible moment she believed she had the answer, that the entire cycle had nothing to do with Michael at all, or Aaron, or the boys who vanished in old files. That maybe it had always been her. That maybe she had been speaking through time, over and over, slipping her own voice into places it shouldn't belong. It explained everything, didn't it? The notebooks, the voicemails, the eerie sensation of hearing herself in languages she'd never learned. She could almost breathe again, convinced she'd solved the unsolvable. And then she found the second document, buried deeper in the archives. Not a transcript this time, but a photograph. Black and white, a classroom from decades ago. Children seated at desks, blurred from movement, faces turned toward the camera. In the front row, a boy no older than 12 sat frozen, lips parted as though and beside him, seated in the next desk, caught with the same blur of motion, was a girl who looked exactly like her. Same face, same hair, same scar on the cheek she'd gotten from falling off her bike at 7 years old. That was when the false resolution shattered, because it meant the past wasn't just repeating. It meant she had been there before. Or someone who wore her face had. And if that was true, then the transcripts weren't warnings. They were rehearsals. This realization didn't set her free. It bound her tighter. Every answer opened a wound. Every memory carried a double. She began to feel as if she were walking inside a hall of mirrors. Reflections bending around her, none of them entirely honest. All of them plausible enough to keep her questioning which one was real. She told Aaron's mother about the photograph, about the file, but the woman only stared at her with blank eyes, like she was waiting for a script she couldn't quite recall. Then she said something that hollowed her out. Asterisk, we've seen this before. You're not crazy, they lied to you. Asterisk, but who lied? And why? That question pressed harder with each night she awoke to find her phone glowing, a new voicemail waiting with no number attached. Sometimes they were silent. Sometimes it was her own voice, whispering words that evaporated the moment she tried to remember them. But just once the voice wasn't hers. It was a man's voice, older, calm, deliberate, and though she couldn't place it, something inside her recognized it. The way you recognize a dream you've already lived through. The message was only 6 words long. You've been speaking since you were 8. Memory folded in on itself. She was 8 again, sitting in her childhood kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Her mother watching her with that same too long blink she remembered from the teacher's face. Her mother asking her to repeat what she'd said, and her not knowing what she meant. Her mother pressing record on a tape deck. The silence afterward. The missing tape. She had lived through this before. She had been speaking long before Michael, long before Aaron, and yet the terror wasn't that she had spoken. The terror was that someone had been listening. She thought the answer was in the archives, in the past, in the files they tried to bury, but the deeper truth was worse. The thing had never left her. It had been watching all along, recording, feeding, bending time in ways she couldn't understand. The false resolution dissolved in her hands, dripping like sand through her fingers, because there was nothing to solve, there was only something to survive. That was when she noticed the photograph again. Not the children, not the boy, not herself, but the back corner of the room, where a shadow stretched across the wall. No source, no shape, just a dark smear that seemed to lean closer with each time she looked. and when she blinked, it seemed to move. That was the detail that unraveled everything. Because it meant she hadn't been the one repeating the words. She had only been echoing them. She had only ever been the receiver. And suddenly, the story she thought she had uncovered, the one about whispered phrases, memory glitches, erased boys, wasn't the story at all. The real story was the one beneath it, the one that had been unfolding for decades, maybe longer, the one no transcript could contain, because the act of writing it down would only change it again. The hidden truth is this. The thing you fear isn't what was taken from you, or what you can't remember. It's what you remember too clearly, only to realize it never happened in this lifetime. The voices aren't hallucinations, they're rehearsals. You've been speaking all along, and the final twist came not in a photograph or a file, but in her own reflection. She looked into the mirror one morning, exhausted, certain she had lost her mind, certain she was chasing shadows, and her reflection whispered first. It said her name. It said she had been here before, and then it said something that forced her to rewatch every moment, every detail of her unraveling life up until now. You were the first one they erased. Would you like me to carry this into a final chapter that collapses the boundary between her reality and the audience? Where the viewers themselves feel implicated, as if the whispers were never just in her story but leaking into theirs. It began with the mirror whispering her name, but it didn't end there. The next days unfolded like a fevered script she could not escape, where every detail seemed staged for her and yet meant for someone else watching through her eyes. She thought she was alone in this, her memories fractured, her reflection speaking, but then came the first message, slid under her front door, with no knock, no footsteps, nothing to explain how it arrived. The paper was ordinary notebook stock, lined, torn at the edge, but the words, written in thick black marker, carried the weight of something ancient. Asterisk, you were right all along. There are others. She froze with the note in her hand, pulse thudding, because those were the words she had been clinging to in her own mind. The reassurance she had whispered to herself on nights she felt like she was vanishing. To see them on paper, written in a hand not her own, meant someone had been listening. Someone had been near enough to hear. And at the bottom of the page, a symbol had been drawn. A circle fractured into 3 jagged lines, not symmetrical, not neat, but strangely familiar, as if she had seen it carved into a desk or sketched into the margins of a textbook years before. That was the first time she understood she was not the only one living inside this unraveling. There were others, silent, watching, waiting for her to see the signals. Soon they began to multiply. Not the people never, the people. They remained hidden, untouchable, but the signs. Scratched into bathroom stalls, chalked onto sidewalks that washed clean within hours. Patterns drawn in condensation on bus windows, gone before she could photograph them. Always the same fractured circle, always appearing when she felt most certain she was losing her grip. And then, the shared dream. She woke gasping, her sheets damp with sweat, her body trembling with the vividness of it. A long hallway of lockers, rusted shut, lined in endless rows, lit by a single flickering bulb. Michael was there. Aaron was there. But they didn't look at her. They walked past her, mouths moving, whispering the same impossible cadence she could not translate. At the end of the hallway stood a figure she couldn't quite see, blurred, faceless, a smear of static in human form. And when she awoke, she thought it was only hers, only her own nightmare. Until she checked her phone. 3 new messages, each from different unknown numbers, each arriving at 3:17 a.m., all of them describing the same dream. Same hallway, same flickering bulb, same faceless figure, and at the end of each message, the same warning typed in uneven capitals. Don't answer when they call you. That was when the weight shifted from paranoia to conspiracy, when she realized she wasn't being haunted in isolation, but pulled into something collective, something vast, something that stretched far beyond her own fractured memories. Because if strangers were seeing her dreams, if strangers were sending her the words she whispered in her sleep, then identity itself was slipping. She was not simply herself anymore. She was part of an overlapping field of memory and voice that bled across people, across time. The unease deepened when she found the VHS tape. It was left in her mailbox, unmarked, unaddressed, no case. Just a black cassette with white tape labeling it. Found footage from 20 years ago. She didn't even own a player. But Aaron's mother did, tucked away in her basement. They sat together in the stale, damp air, the old machine buzzing as it dragged the tape forward. The footage was grainy, filmed inside a classroom that looked eerily familiar. Desks, chalkboard, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Children sat frozen, their eyes locked on one boy standing at the front. His lips moved, silent in the degraded audio. The camera shook as though whoever filmed it couldn't hold still, but for a split second, just before the tape warped, she saw herself sitting in the front row, younger, smaller, but undeniably her. Aaron's mother gasped and whispered, "I remember this." But it wasn't you. It was him. She pressed pause. The image distorted, The boy at the front flickering between two faces, one moment a stranger, the next Michael, then Aaron, then herself. She stared at the screen until her stomach twisted, because in the bottom corner of the frame, scrawled onto the chalkboard, was the fractured circle. What the government never released, what the transcripts buried, what the erasures tried to consume. It was all here, a chain of recorded moments stretching back decades. All showing the same impossible collapse of identity, as if the faces were never fixed, only placeholders for something using them. And then came the third perspective. It didn't introduce itself with words, but with watching. She began to sense it always just behind her shoulder, always just out of reach. The shadow in the photographs. The blurred static in the dream. The pause before her voicemail played wasn't Michael, it wasn't Aaron, and it wasn't her. It was something that had been there since the beginning, recording, bending, shaping, but never revealing itself. An observer. Perhaps the only one who knew what was happening. Perhaps the only one telling the truth through symbols and erased files. She found its voice not in speech but in writing, hidden in the notebook she had carried since this began. Whole pages of text appeared between the ones she had written herself. Paragraphs that didn't match her handwriting but spoke directly to her. Asterisk, you think you are losing yourself, but you are not. You are being remade. They cannot erase you because you were erased first. This is not the first telling of this story. This is not the first time you have read these words. Asterisk, she should have been terrified, but instead, she felt the weight of recognition, the sickening déjà vu of knowing she had read this before, maybe in another dream, maybe in another life. Every sentence carried the taste of memory, not new but recovered, and with it came the most unbearable thought that the observer wasn't separate from her at all, that maybe it was what remained when everything else was stripped away. The fractured circle kept appearing, not as vandalism or hidden graffiti anymore, but in her own sketches, her own absent-minded doodles. She would look down at the margin of a page and find it already drawn, without remembering when she had moved her hand. She would check her phone and see it embedded in photographs she had never taken. Each time she saw it, she understood it a little more, like decoding a language that had always been hers. Not a circle, not a symbol, but an instruction. 3 lines splitting a whole into fragments. A map for how memory could be broken, rearranged, replaced. And she began to realize this was not about Michael, or Aaron, or herself. It was about all of them. About everyone who had whispered without knowing why. Everyone who had felt the erasure and tried to write it down anyway. Everyone who had woken from the same hallway dream, shaken and certain they were alone, until they found the note that said otherwise. There are others. That phrase became the anchor. She wasn't just unraveling into madness. She was unraveling into a pattern. A collective, a design that had been hiding in plain sight. Denied, covered, lied about, but never destroyed. The hidden truth wasn't that she was special or cursed. The hidden truth was that she was one of many. And the more she understood this, the heavier it became. Because if there were others, it meant someone or something was collecting them, watching, waiting for the moment when they would all speak in unison. The unease reached its breaking point when she turned on her phone camera late one night, staring into the lens as if daring herself to confront her own reflection. She whispered the words Michael had said, the ones she could never quite translate. The screen glitched, flickered, froze. And for a split second, not even a full frame, she saw behind herself in the video. A crowd faces she didn't recognize, watching her in total silence. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Their eyes locked on her, their mouths closed, waiting. She dropped the phone, shaking, but when she picked it up again, the footage was gone. Nothing but static. Yet in the static, she swore she saw the fractured circle burn faintly into the white noise. That was the moment she understood the story wasn't hers anymore. It was theirs. It had always been theirs. And the voice whispering in the back of her head, the one telling her to stop, to walk away, to pretend she'd never seen any of this, was not fear. It was the observer, giving her one last chance before she saw too much, but she kept watching. And so have you. The ending doesn't close. It doesn't release. It waits, charged with energy, because the next voice, the next dream, the next erased name could just as easily be yours. And when it happens, when you find yourself whispering words you don't understand into the quiet of your own room, you'll remember this story. You'll remember the fractured circle. You'll remember the note slid under the door. And you'll know there are others. Would you like me to escalate the final act into a collapse of boundaries, where the audience is directly implicated, turning the story into something they cannot separate from their own memory? She had always thought the hardest part would be uncovering what happened: Michael's disappearance, Aaron's erasure, the endless fractured circle that followed her across notebooks, walls, dreams. But now, with the evidence spread before her in torn paper and fading VHS reels, she realized the question was never what or even how. It was asterisk why. Why her voice? Why their faces? Why the erasures, the whispered rehearsals, the watcher in the margins? Why did the story need to keep repeating it all? That why burned in her chest like a brand, because deep down she already knew the answer would cost her more than ignorance ever had. Truth is not a gift, it's a blade. It cuts one way or the other, and once you see the wound, you can't unsee it. She went back to the beginning, to the first voicemail, the one with her own voice whispering words she could not recall speaking. She played it on loop, over and over, late into the night, until her ears rang with the cadence of her own breath. And something happened in the exhaustion, in the sleepless blur, where thought unravels into memory. She remembered. She was 8 years old again, sitting at the kitchen table, her mother watching her too closely. She remembered the tape deck recording, the look in her mother's eyes when the playback didn't match. Her mother had whispered, *, you don't even know what you're saying, do you? And she had shaken her head, because it wasn't her voice at all. It was something that borrowed her mouth, something that wanted to be heard. The painful confession landed heavy in her gut. She had known this all along. She had always known the words weren't hers. She had chosen to forget, because forgetting was the only way to keep living. Memory glitches weren't mistakes. They were shields. The erasures weren't punishments. They were mercies. But now she faced the choice that destroyed and saved in the same breath. To believe the truth and let it burn through her until nothing of her old self remained. Or to deny it again, fold it into silence, and keep breathing inside the dream. Both paths were irreversible. She whispered aloud into the quiet room, asking a question she had never dared. *, if I am only an echo, then who is speaking? The answer didn't come in words, but in the heavy silence that followed. A silence that pressed against her chest like another presence in the room. For the first time, she didn't run from it. She let it sit inside her, raw, human, terrifying. Because maybe that was the truth hidden behind every erased name, every blurred recording, every fractured circle. That being human was not about control, not about memory, not about certainty. It was about carrying voices that didn't always belong to us. It was about choosing whether to let them define us or not. The observer, the shadow, the watcher, had never been an enemy. It had been waiting. It had been holding up the mirror, daring her to see that the line between her and the whispers was never real. She wasn't cursed. She wasn't chosen. She was simply human, and humanity had always been haunted by the voices it tried to deny. The terrifying awakening struck like lightning. What if the mystery wasn't meant to be solved at all? What if it existed only to show her the cost of knowing? What if the story was the cage, and she had been rattling the bars so hard she hadn't noticed the door had always been open? She felt herself fracturing, not into madness, but into clarity. Her identity, her memory, her control, none of it had been hers to begin with. And yet, in the raw center of that loss, there was freedom. She could choose to step back into the cycle and let it devour her, or to step forward and accept that she was both the voice and the echo, the erased and the remembering, the dreamer and the dream. Her eyes blurred with tears, not from fear, but from something more unbearable. Recognition. She saw Michael's face, Aaron's voice, her younger self in the photograph, all merging into the same truth. They had never vanished. They had never been erased. They were all still here, threaded together through memory, through whispers, through the fractured circle of voices that refused to stay silent. The open-ended terror wasn't that she had lost them, it was that she could never separate herself from them again. And as she sat there in the silence, phone still in her hand, the screen flickered to life without her touching it. A new voicemail, time-stamped in the future 3 days ahead. The message preview showed one line, as if daring her to press play. *, when you finally believe, you'll wake up. *, the choice was hers. To listen, or not. To believe, or to keep denying. The story bent on that single moment, trembling, alive, unfinished. And maybe that's what it means to be human, not to find the answers, but to stand at the edge of the unanswerable and decide whether to step through. The screen dimmed, her reflection staring back at her in the black glass, whispering words she hadn't spoken yet. And in that haunting reflection, the story did not end. It only waited. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.